This is Podcast Bootcamp Series 3, number 100310 Identification. The Podcast Doctor is in. The Podcast Doctor reviews Every Little Thing podcast, or How the Organ Got into Baseball. A good time was had by all except this listener. A textbook on what not to do when talking sports. As a fellow podcaster, I'm always prepared to like any podcast. Mostly, you can't do it wrong. It's your show after all. Considering the amount of travel and production time which went into this show, I had higher expectations. The program format had the host talk to a listener about a question he had submitted by mail. It was the weakest part of the show. Remember Rush Limbaugh's first principle. He's the king of talk radio. The purpose of the callers is to make the host look good. Problema. Little Spanish lingo here. The host doesn't know anything about baseball. That little square thing is home plate, and it's not a square at all. It's a pentagon. Baseball has grand slams, not touchdowns. And innings, not periods. Except for those caveats, the programming was listenable and fast-paced. The connection with organ in sports is much older than I imagined, going back to the Colosseum of ancient Rome. The caller got confused at the purpose of the Colosseum. Not a place of death and destruction, but of games. Yes, it's true, gladiatorial games were death and destruction, but that's what the Romans thought of as games. Feeding Christians to the lions was a form of halftime entertainment. On a commercial level, I did find this program to be a terrestrial radio hit. However, I question the use of curate in talking about casual dining, such a formal word for a leisure activity. I recommend the purchase of a sports style guide and reference manual. It's in my library. Or perhaps consult the AP style book for a list of sports terminology. I know this was not the fault of the host of this podcast, because at the end of the program, there was a list of at least 8 names of programming associates. With one exception, no one was named as writer. Podcasting Rule 1. Know what you will say before you hit record. This has been Podcast Bootcamp Series 3, number 100310 for Identification.